Many people think slavery in America is a thing of the past. We fought a civil war to get rid of it, and we're glad it's gone. But many people are still enslaved today. We're talking about financial slavery and how to break the bonds of financial slavery right now on Wealth Talks.
There were many people who championed the idea of eradicating slavery in the United States. But it wouldn't surprise me if most people associate emancipation with the name Abraham Lincoln.
When it comes to financial slavery in the U.S., there are many people who advocate breaking the bonds of financial slavery. And one of the most vocal on the subject may be Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey is a financial pundit well known for his 7-step program to help people get out of debt. The first step in his program is to save $1,000 so you have something in case of emergency.
That's a good thing.
That was one of the first things my parents taught me, was to save money.
Report after report that I read says most people don't have enough money to take care of an expense that came up unexpectedly for $1,000. So it's a good idea to have that money just tucked away in reserve. The second step is to pay off all your non-housing debt. We call that non-performing debt because it's very important that you're not bleeding financially. And when you have non-performing debt that is not producing more money for you than what the interest is costing, that's like bleeding to death.
So probably most commonly, this is credit card debt. This is your Discover card, your Visa card, your MasterCard, your store cards, all of that.
One exception to that might be student loans. If they are a nice low rate or a very low payment, that's kind of more like a mortgage where it's a long-term debt, and it may be worth using that as a good debt. Even if you didn't necessarily get the value out of the education that you thought you might, which many people don't, that those student loans are more of a long-term debt, maybe not something to pay off as quickly as credit cards.
Another exception to that might be a car payment. You may need a car to get to work, but you don't need a Corvette to get to work. So we have to balance this to make sure that we're not going into debt just for a luxury. Because of car payment, it really is a non-performing debt because of the depreciation on the car happens so quickly.
Okay, so what's step 3?
Step 3 is then once you get your non-housing debt all paid off, Dave Ramsey suggests that we increase our savings so that we have 3 to 4 months of income saved so that in case something happens to our job or to our health, that we're not put behind the 8 ball.
Step 1 is save. Step 2 is get rid of the debt. Step 3 is now you can save more because you don't have that debt.
And then step 4 is he's saying he wants you to invest 15% of everything you make into a 401k or an IRA. Here we kind of debate whether that's the best thing to do with that money but Dave Ramsey's talking from his own personal experience. He was 26 years old. He was making $250,000 in his real estate portfolio. And all of a sudden, the banks call his loans. $2 million of loans got called overnight, and Dave Ramsey didn't have the money to pay it off with. Now, to his credit, he paid off about 3/4 of that debt, but he filed bankruptcy on the remaining balance. So he's wanting to have money put away someplace where bankruptcy can't touch it. And a 401k and an IRA is a place that is judgment-proof. So we prefer life insurance to do that because it also gives you access to the money if you need it.
The people that are in debt feel like they're in financial slavery. And in order to break the bonds of that, having a step-by-step program like this is probably helpful for them. Maybe even having somebody like Dave Ramsey, who's a little bit hard-nosed in the process of saying, you got to do this, maybe that helps them to get out of that debt.
People that are enslaved, even if we go back in any country where slavery is in existence today or was in the past, those people that are enslaved often have been so entrapped, they don't have any creativity left. They're just stuck in a rigid form because that's the way they survive. It's a survival mode. And so sometimes to get out of that survival mode, they need a taskmaster like Dave Ramsey who's cracking the whip over them and say, do this, do this, do this. But that doesn't create the freedom and the liberty and the creativity that is going to generate the most wealth for you.
So we had save, pay off debt, save, invest. What's the next step?
The next step is starting college funds for your children if you have them. So he recommends 529 plans or educational savings accounts. And those aren't bad plans necessarily, but they have to be spent on education. Otherwise, you incur a tax liability. And so, again, we just prefer to use the whole life insurance cash values for that savings because you can use it for anything and there's no limitations and it's still tax preferred. Step number 6 is to pay off your mortgage as soon as possible. Sometimes this comes across even as you do it above everything else. You scrimp on everything else and you do this. And there's nothing wrong with paying your mortgage off, but there's nothing wrong with having a mortgage either. A mortgage is a promissory note that you have with someone else that they allow you to live in their house until you pay for it. And you get to do all the fixing up and painting and doing everything you want to. And most people in America today do not have the financial resources to pay their house off immediately. We talk about having a cash cushion, and until you have a cash cushion that you could comfortably afford to pay your house off with, it's probably not a good idea to try to be doing that. It would be better to be keeping that money in a safe, liquid place like whole life insurance than it would to be put it in to real estate that might depreciate like it did in 2008 and 1982 and is already happened to start around the country today, because now, even if you needed that money, it's inaccessible to you.
We like to make evaluations. Is it a good idea, if you have extra funds, is it a good idea to pay off the mortgage, or is there something else that you could do better? So we don't always say, pay off the mortgage. We want to evaluate. What are the financial opportunities you have? Is the best thing to do right now pay off the mortgage? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. That's something we have to evaluate.
5 years ago, when interest rates were low, I would say that it probably didn't make sense to pay off the mortgage because it was easier to find an investment that would make more than the interest rate on the mortgage. Today, with interest rates being higher, that's not always the case anymore. And so for many people, it might make sense to pay off their mortgage over time.
There are different step programs out there. This 7-step program to get out of debt is one. You look at addictive behavior. There's AA for that. The 12-step program is very popular. Those programs work. Dave Ramsey's program works. There's no doubt about it. But many people don't need the rigidity of that. They want to be able to maybe combine these steps all together in a way where right from the very beginning, they're saving and they're protecting and they're also creating wealth. They're not waiting till step number 7 where Dave Ramsey says, now we can build wealth.
You were talking about how the rigidity of each step kind of gave me a picture in my mind of someone who either needs to lose weight or has a health issue such as diabetes, where they have to even weigh out how much protein they're eating. They weigh out how much carbohydrate they have for every meal. Now, we could all do that, but we don't all need to do that. Some of us are in a healthier position. We have a little more flexibility because we already have good patterns, discipline to eat the things that we need. But it's different with someone who is a brittle diabetic or needs to lose a lot of weight. They need much stronger guidelines or rules to follow, where we don't need that if we have a little bit healthier mindset, maybe even towards a financial, when we're not in financial bondage, even in our minds.
Well, I know, Michelle, that we paid our first house off in 5 years, and our second house we paid cash for. And we did that not because we were scrimping necessarily, but remember when we first got married, every Sunday we sat down together and we went over what you spent and what I spent. And we got an idea.
Need to be on the same page.
Yeah, we wanted to be on the same page. We weren't critiquing each other. Oh, you spent that on this. Why did you do that? We were just finding out where our money that we were making was going.
Because as single people, we were used to spending money, and now we need to account for both of the expenditures.
And coming together like that, we were able to get rid of our mortgage very quickly. Looking back on it, that may not have been the best thing for us to do, is to get rid of our mortgage. It could have been that we should have built a bigger financial cushion so that when we were able to pay for our mortgage, we didn't feel like we were paupers again.
Yes.
Because even though you pay your mortgage off, guess what? You have the tax man that appears every year, sometimes twice a year, depending on where you live, that says you owe property taxes. And if you don't, they put a lien on the house that you just paid off.
This is a popular hallmark for people that are in financial slavery. The way that they think about things, they feel stuck. They feel a little bit hopeless. And so when they realize that the government is collecting taxes, well, now they can blame the government. They can blame inflation for their problems. They can blame whatever it is for the reason that they are where they are. And yet there's still opportunity to break those bonds here in America.
And we talked to a lot of people that have gone through Dave Ramsey's program and gone to one of his seminars even, read his books. And some of them do very well with the 7-step program. Others go through it, and then 6 months later, they're back into more debt than they ever were. And it's because I believe that the system doesn't give you rewards along the way. I mean, when someone's dieting, they have to have cheat days to reward themselves as they're going along. And the rigidity of the 12-step plan or the 7-step plan here for debt doesn't give you much flexibility in being allowed to feel like you're rewarding yourself.
The way we look at it, we like to look at building wealth all along the way, not waiting till step 7. And we talk about having protection on your life and having your savings right from the beginning and working on debt. So you shouldn't just be paying off all the debt. You should be paying yourself first. And so having the protection, savings, debt, investments come later, just as Dave Ramsey mentions. The investment should be later. You've got to take care of this foundation first.
Dave Ramsey runs a business. It's his syndicated radio show. He also sells books. He also sells other products to help people. Those are very financially rewarding for Dave Ramsey. Another thing is that he still has quite a large portfolio of rental property. That's a steady income for him. And then what a lot of people get hung up on is the fact that he's talking about this investment. I mean, he often uses 11%. In the past, he's used 12%. And he puts those investments in fairly risky places to get that high rate of return. And even Dave Ramsey doesn't get it every year, because the market doesn't return it every year. So people get this idea, oh, if I just follow Dave Ramsey and I put my money into these mutual funds, then I'm going to get rich quick. And that's not the way it works.
But because he put some of his money there, that's not necessarily out of balance for him, because he has these other things going as well, his business, his real estate.
He has his established foundation, and now he can go and speculate. And that's what those mutual funds are doing, is his speculation.
When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about people we know who have successfully escaped financial slavery and what happened when they found financial freedom. The best part of the podcast is yet to come.
Ken is a client of McPhee Insurance. In 2008, he lost about half of his investments. That was before he was a client, but he had been following conventional financial wisdom to a T. Many people don't put enough money away for their retirement, but Ken did put money away for his retirement. He says the most frustrating thing when 2008 came along, he had been putting money away for 35 years, and it hadn't grown to what he expected it should have. Then 2008 came along, and it took half of it away. He really felt like he was backpedaling instead of making progress the way he should. That's when Ken discovered using life insurance as a financial tool with the infinite banking concept. He says not only does it give him more stability with his finances, but it puts him back in control instead of giving control to somebody else. Many people find out about using life insurance as a financial tool during an economic downturn or a market crash. And while it's good they're getting the coverage they need, we really wish we could turn the clock back for these people so they could have the good life insurance in place before the economic downturn or the market crash. Because good life insurance helps you to keep more of the money that you make, grow your wealth, and have financial peace of mind even during turbulent economic times. To get the good life insurance you need, call McPhee Insurance at 702-660-7000. Call us sooner than later.
When I think of breaking the bonds of financial slavery, I always think of Ethan. Ethan called us several years ago, and he was struggling because they were spending more than he could bring home. It was kind of a unique situation. He had 5 children. One of them with special needs. His wife needed to stay home with that special needs child. And Ethan just didn't seem to be able to generate enough money to meet what they thought their needs were. In fact, he was only able to fill up his propane tank enough to last for about 2 weeks. And living in the Midwest, those nasty cold winters that we get, that didn't go very far. And so each time the truck came out to fill up his tank, or to put propane in his tank because it never got filled up, he had to pay a service charge plus a fuel tax for the truck to get out there. So not only were they spending more, they were having to spend money where they shouldn't have to spend money. And so we put a challenge out to Ethan. And that challenge was, how much are you worth? Are you worth as much as what you're making? And he says, well, I'm worth more than what I'm making. I said, then you need to prove that to yourself by keeping 10% of everything you generate. And it doesn't matter where you keep it. You can keep it in your chest of drawers or under your mattress or whatever. And I said, and call me in 3 months and let's see how much money you've been able to keep.
Well, he called you before 3 months was up.
He did. And he said, I am shocked, Dr. McPhee, how much money is here. And the thing is we didn't even miss it. And we have used this challenge on many people since, and those who take me up on the challenge have always said the same thing. It's a discipline, a self-discipline, that someone applies to themselves to live within their means. And it wasn't long before we were able to get Ethan into a whole life insurance policy, and now he could borrow from his policy to fill up his tank, and all the service charge and fuel taxes he was able to keep for himself.
Yeah. So when he purchased this whole life insurance policy, it was building cash value. And what does he do with that money? How can he use it? Well, we used it to address a specific concern in his life. And that was all the service charge he was having to pay to get the propane tank filled. Well, he had enough money now that he could borrow from the policy and fill up that propane tank. So cut off an expenditure that he had for himself because he hadn't saved. Now he was saving. Now he had the money to take care of another expense.
Once he got the fuel bill under control, he was able to move forward and apply that same process to other debts in his life. Now, the fuel wasn't necessarily a debt, but it was kind of an emergency thing to get enough fuel in there that his family could have heat for the winter. But there were debts in his life because they'd been spending more than they made for a long time. And it took a few years, and all of a sudden there was no debt. And now he could be thinking about other things he wanted to do. And one of the things he wanted to do was to invest in his family. And I can remember the time about 3 years after that first call with Ethan, he called me and said, Dr. Tom, I'm taking my family to Disneyland. It's the first family trip we have ever taken. And I'm doing it because I can borrow from my policy and pay it back on my own schedule.
I like to think of Linda, too. She had a lot of debt. She contacted us. She purchased a life insurance policy. And John, you were able to help her create a plan just for her and her debt schedules, all the debts that she had, and you made a workable plan so that she could pay it off. And she stuck to that plan for years. And oftentimes she'd call our office and she'd say, by the way, I'm still on my plan.
She had to make some adjustments along the way, but
sure,
she stuck with it.
Things came up,
Yes.
and she stuck with it. And then just a couple years ago, she called our office. She and her husband had the opportunity to borrow from their life insurance to put a down payment on a home for their daughter. It was her first home. She worked out the deal on the side with a real estate agent. What a blessing that was to her daughter. What a blessing it was for her. She left financial slavery, and now she was in a position to help her daughter in a way that many people would only dream of.
One of the biggest things that people who want to break the bonds of financial slavery will face is having the imagination to see beyond where they are right now. We see that throughout history when Moses and Aaron helped to rescue the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. God performed all the miracles to help bring them out of Egypt, and then the Israelites grumbled in the wilderness. Why did we ever leave Egypt? They couldn't see beyond where they were in the past. And that's always a difficult thing about breaking the bonds of slavery. Something has always been the way it's been. What do you have for the vision for the next step?
Solomon wrote about that when he said, my people perish for lack of vision. If we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, if we're so entrapped in our debt that we can't see any hope for the future, then we're going to perish. And that's something that Dave Ramsey has helped people do, is see, oh, there is a way out of this. And he needs to be commended for that. It's something that we do all the time with people that are struggling with debt. We just like to do it in a different format that provides a little more creativity and liberty.
Many people in financial slavery feel stuck and hopeless. Treading water is just not enough because they're already in a hole.
If you have debt that is keeping you in financial bondage, you need to do something about it now. Whether you use Dave Ramsey's 7-step program or you work with us to get out of debt, you need to do it now so that you can have the freedom and liberty to be wealthy.
Next week, we are talking about budgeting. We don't have a budget. We don't like budgeting, but we don't spend more than we make either. We are going to be talking about how we handle our personal finances next week, right here on Wealth Talks.